Alright. Trying to get my phone set up pretty well here. There we go, that looks better. Alright, welcome mortals. It's time for more Nate Reads the Classics. As the title says, this is going to be more of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne from the public domain. I forget when exactly it was written, in 1850 something, or no, not 1850, it's after the date that it's taking place. The events are taking place in 1867, so I think it was a little after that. But it was actually written, I think, before The Time Machine, which was the last thing that I read on Nate Reads the Classics. You should be able to jump over and go see that now on my YouTube channel, Nathan T. Orgel Author. I put all of my live streams from here on Twitch onto that YouTube channel, so you can watch the videos on demand whenever you want, because I believe that they will eventually go away from Twitch, best I understand. I'm not working with a budget at all. I'm just kind of doing everything. Oh, looks like having that white screen really changes changes things a lot for how the video looks, so I will keep that screen on. Anyway, yeah, my name is Nathan Orgel, Nathan Thomas Orgel. I'm a fantasy author, and I like to read, well, I just like to read in general, but I also like to read here on Twitch to help people understand, and, you know, people who don't have the patience or who have various other, you know, maybe mental conditions that make sitting down and reading a book a little difficult, or, you know, even if just as a sleep aid they just want to hear someone talking. I jump on Twitch every now and then and I read some classic literature. It's all public domain, so it can't be copyright struck or anything like that. Last time I was doing this, I was reading off my phone. This time I'm just going to read off the PC because I think it'll work out better. It's a little clearer this way, and I don't have to, you know, move anything around and handle things that way. But yeah, this is starting at Chapter 6, At Full Steam, more of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. At this cry, the whole ship's crew... Oh, maybe I should do a bit of a recap. So there's a giant sea monster that has appeared. The main character believes it to be a giant narwhal of some kind. One way bigger than anything ever recorded. One large enough that its horn, or, you know, tooth or whatever, was able to pierce a steel hull of a different ship. And so he's going out with other people to go kill it, to, you know, rid it from the seas so it doesn't attack ships anymore. And so he is with, I forget the name of the captain. It's not Captain Nemo. He's not there yet. But anyway, there's the captain that he's with. There's a master harpooner named Ned Land. And then there's his servant named Conseil. And that's kind of the situation. And they have just spotted the monster out in the water. They're in I think the Atlantic Ocean, I want to say, because they were coming from the U.S. and going toward France, or coming from France going toward the U.S. I believe that's what it was, so they should be in the Atlantic. So that's where I left off. Now, Chapter 6, At Full Steam. At this cry, the whole ship's crew hurried towards the harpooner. Commander, officers, masters, sailors, cabin boys, even the engineers left their engines, and the stokers their furnaces. The order to stop her had been given, and the frigate now simply went on by her own momentum. The darkness was then profound, and however good the Canadian's eyes were, I asked myself how he had managed to see, and what he had been able to see. My heart beat as if it would break. But Ned Land was not mistaken, and we all perceived the object he pointed to. At 2 cables' length from the Abraham Lincoln, on the starboard quarter, The sea seemed to be illuminated all over. It was not a mere phosphoric phenomenon. The monster emerged some fathoms from the water and then threw out that very intense but mysterious light mentioned in the report of several captains. This magnificent irradiation must have been produced by an agent of great shining power. The luminous part traced on the sea an immense oval, which elongated, the center of which condensed a burning heat whose overpowering brilliancy died out by successive gradations. "It is only a massing of phosphoric particles," cried one of the officers. "No, sir, certainly not," I replied. "That brightness is of an essentially electrical nature. Besides, see, it moves. It is moving forwards, backwards, it is darting toward us." A general cry arose from the frigate. "Silence," said the captain. "Up with the helm, reverse the engines." The steam was shut off, and the Abraham Lincoln, beating to port, described a semicircle. "Right the helm, go ahead," cried the captain. The orders were executed, and the frigate moved rapidly from the burning light. I was mistaken. She tried to sheer off, but the supernatural animal approached with a velocity double her own. We gasped for breath. Stupefaction more than fear made us dumb and motionless. The animal gained on us, sporting with the waves. It made the round of the frigate, which was then making 14 knots, and enveloped it with its electric rings like luminous dust. Then it moved away 2 or 3 miles, leaving a phosphorescent track, but like those volumes of steam that the express trains leave behind. All at once, from the dark line of the horizon, whither it retired to gain its momentum, the monster rushed suddenly toward the Abraham Lincoln with alarming rapidity, stopped suddenly about 20 feet from the hull, and died out. Not diving under the water, for its brilliancy did not abate, but suddenly, as if the source of this brilliant emanation was exhausted. Then it appeared on the other side of the vessel, as if it had turned and slid under the hull. Any moment a collision might have occurred which would have been fatal to us. However, I was astonished at the maneuvers of the frigate. She fled and did not attack. On the captain's face, generally so impassive, was an expression of unaccountable astonishment. "Mr. Aronnax," he said, "I do not know with what formidable being I have to deal, and I will not imprudently risk my frigate in the midst of this darkness. Besides, how attack this unknown thing? How defend one's self from it? Wait for daylight, and the scene will change." "You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal?" "No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one. Perhaps," added I, "one can only approach it with a torpedo." "Undoubtedly," replied the captain. "If it possesses such a dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that ever was created." Speaking of animals, I think my cat's going to join me. Hello. Gonna jump up? No? No, you like that side? Hold on a moment. Come on up here. Come on up here. Come here. Come on. Well, I'll keep reading. If he jumps up, he jumps up. "Wait for daylight, and the scene will change. I have no further doubt, Captain. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal?" Hey, if you're gonna come up here, come up here. Come on. There he is. This is Jack. You might have seen him before if you've watched any of my live streams. He likes to jump up on me and do generally what he's doing right now, which usually he stays on my shoulder, so this is unusual. I hope he doesn't attack my backdrop. And that's what he's going to do. Hey. Hey. Come here. Jack is a rambunctious one. And yes, he is attacking my backdrop. I have no idea why. Can you not do that? Hey. There's nothing there. It's just cloth. Jack. Sorry for the interruption. Jack, get off. This is trouble. Okay, here we go. Come on. Come on. No? Shoulder cat? Okay. Can you rest on my shoulder? Thank you. You have no further doubt, Captain, of the nature of the animal? No, sir. It is evidently a gigantic narwhal, and an electric one. Perhaps, added I, one can only approach it with a torpedo. Undoubtedly, replied the captain. If it possesses such a dreadful power, it is the most terrible animal that ever was created. That is why, sir, I must be on my guard. The crew were on their feet all night. No one thought of sleep. The Abraham Lincoln, not being able to struggle with such velocity, had moderated its pace and sailed at half speed. For its part, the narwhal, imitating the frigate, let the waves rock it at will, and seemed decided not to leave the scene of the struggle. Towards midnight, however, it disappeared, or to use a more appropriate term, it died out, like a large glowworm. Had it fled? One could only fear, not hope it. But at 7 minutes to 1 o'clock in the morning, a deafening whistling was heard, like that produced by a body of water rushing with great violence. The captain, Ned Land, and I were then on the poop, eagerly peering through the profound darkness. Ned Land, asked the commander, you have often heard of the roaring of whales? Often, sir, but never such whales, the sight of which brought me in $2,000. If I can only approach within 4 harpoons' length of it. But to approach it, said the commander, I ought to put a whaler at your disposal? Certainly, sir. That will be trifling with the lives of my men, and mine too, simply said the harpooner. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared. You got something in your eye socket there. Jack has one eye, so I have to dig in his empty eye socket sometimes to get things out of it. Thank you. Towards 2 o'clock in the morning, the burning light reappeared, not less intense, about 5 miles to the windward of the Abraham Lincoln. Notwithstanding the distance and the noise of the wind and sea, one heard distinctly the loud strokes of the animal's tail and even its panting breath. It seemed that at the moment of the enormous narwhal had come to take breath at the surface of the water. The air was engulfed in its lungs, like a steam in the vast cylinders of a machine of 2,000 horsepower. Hum, thought I, a whale with the strength of a cavalry regiment would be a pretty whale. We were on the qui vive until daylight, and prepared for the combat. The fishing implements were laid along the hammock nettings. The second lieutenant loaded the blunderbusses, which could throw harpoons to the distance of a mile, and long duck guns with explosive bullets, which inflicted mortal wounds even to the most terrible animals. Ned Land contented himself with sharpening his harpoon. There's a train, sorry. Sharpening his harpoon, a terrible weapon in his hands. At 6 o'clock day began to break, and with the first glimmer of light, the electric light of the narwhal disappeared. At 7 o'clock, the day was sufficiently advanced, but a very thick sea fog obscured our view, and the best spyglasses could not pierce it. That caused disappointment and anger. I climbed the mizzen-mast. Some officers were already perched on the mastheads. At 8 o'clock the fog lay heavily on the waves, and its thick scrolls rose little by little. The horizon grew wider and clearer at the same time. Suddenly, just as on the day before, Ned Land's voice was heard. "The thing itself, on the port quarter," cried the harpooner. Every eye was turned towards the point indicated. There, a mile and a half from the frigate, a long blackish body emerged a yard above the waves. Its tail, violently agitated, produced a considerable eddy. Never did a tail beat the sea with such violence. An immense track of dazzling whiteness marked the passage of the animal and described a long curve. The frigate approached the cetacean. I examined it thoroughly. The reports of the Shannon and of the Helvetia had rather exaggerated its size, and I estimated its length at only 250 feet. As to its dimensions, I could only conjecture them to be admirably proportioned. While I watched this phenomenon, 2 jets of steam and water were ejected from its vents and rose to the height of 120 feet. Thus I ascertained its way of breathing. I concluded definitely that it belonged to the vertebrate branch, class Mammalia. The crew waited impatiently for their chief's orders. The latter, after having observed the animal attentively, called the engineer. The engineer ran to him. "Sir," said the commander, you have steam up?" "Yes, sir," answered the engineer. "Well, make up your fires and put on all steam." 3 hurrahs greeted this order. The time for the struggle had arrived. Some moments after, the 2 funnels of the frigate vomited torrents of black smoke, and the bridge quaked under the trembling of the boilers. The Abraham Lincoln, propelled by her wonderful crew... Screw? It says screw, but I think it's supposed to say crew. Went straight at the animal. The latter allowed it to come within half a cable's length. Then, as if disdaining to dive, it took a little turn and stopped a short distance off. This pursuit lasted nearly 3/4 of an hour, without the frigate gaining 2 yards on the cetacean. It was quite evident that at the rate we should never come up with it. "Well, Mr. Land," asked the captain, "do you advise me to put the boats out to sea?" "No, sir," replied Ned Land, "because we shall not take that beast easily." "What shall we do, then?" "Put on more steam if you can, sir. With your leave, I mean to post myself under the bowsprit. And if... Bowsprit? Got some of your hair in my mouth. "And if we get within harpooning distance, I shall throw my harpoon." "Go, Ned," said the captain. "Engineer, put on more pressure." Ned Land went to his post. The fires were increased. The screw revolved 43 times a minute, and the steam poured out of the valves. We heaved the log, and calculated that the Abraham Lincoln was going at a rate of 18.5 miles an hour. But the accursed animal swam at the same speed. For a whole hour the frigate kept its pace, without gaining 6 feet. It was humiliating for one of the swiftest sailors in the American Navy. A stubborn anger seized the crew. The sailors abused the monster, who, as before, disdained to answer them. The captain no longer contented himself with twisting his beard. He gnawed it. The engineer was called again. "You have turned full steam on?" "Yes, sir," replied the engineer. The speed of the Abraham Lincoln increased. Its masts tumbled down to their stepping holes, and the clouds of smoke could hardly find their way out of the narrow funnels. They heaved the log the second time. "Well?" asked the captain of the man at the wheel. 19 miles and 3/8, sir." "Clap on more steam." The engineer obeyed. The manometer showed 10 degrees, but the cetacean grew warm itself, no doubt, for without straining itself, it made 19 3/10 miles. What a pursuit! No, I cannot describe the emotion that vibrated through me. Ned Land kept his post, harpoon in hand. Several times the animal let us gain upon it. "We shall catch it, we shall catch it," cried the Canadian. But just as he was going to strike, the cetacean stole away with a rapidity that could not be estimated at less than 30 miles an hour, and even during our maximum of speed, it bullied the frigate, going round and around it. A cry of fury broke from everyone. At noon we were no further advanced than at 8 o'clock in the morning. The captain then decided to take more direct means. "Ah," said he, "that animal goes quicker than the Abraham Lincoln. Very well, we will see whether it will escape these conical bullets. Send your men to the forecastle, sir." The forecastle gun was immediately loaded and slewed round, but the shot passed some feet above the cetacean, which was half a mile off. "Another, more to the right," cried the commander, "and $5 to whoever will hit that infernal beast." An old gunner with a gray beard, all that I can see now, with steady eye and grave face, went up to the gun and took a long aim. A loud report was heard, with which were mingled the cheers of the crew. The bullet did its work. It hit the animal and, sliding off the rounded surface, was lost in 2 miles' depths of sea. The chase began again, and the captain, leaning towards me, said, "I will pursue that beast till my frigate bursts up." "Yes," answered I, "and you will be quite right to do so." I wished the beast would exhaust itself, and not be insensible to fatigue like a steam engine. But it was of no use. Hours passed without its showing any signs of exhaustion. However, it must be said in praise of the Abraham Lincoln that she struggled on indefatigably. I cannot reckon the distance she made under 300 miles during this unlucky day, November the 6th, but night came on and overshadowed the rough ocean. Now I thought our expedition was at an end, and that we should never again see the extraordinary animal. I was mistaken. At 10 minutes to 11 in the evening, the electric light reappeared 3 miles to windward of the frigate, as pure, as intense as during the preceding night. The narwhal seemed motionless, perhaps, tired with its day's work. It slept, letting itself float with the undulation of the waves. Now was a chance for which the captain resolved to take advantage. He gave his orders. The Abraham Lincoln kept up half steam, and advanced cautiously so as not to awake its adversary. It is no rare thing to meet in the middle of the ocean whales so sound asleep that they can be successfully attacked, and Ned Land had harpooned more than one during its sleep. The Canadian went to take his place under the bowsprit. I don't know how to pronounce that, and a lot of things. The frigate approached noiselessly, stopped at 2 cables' length from the animal, and followed its track. No one breathed. A deep silence reigned on the bridge. We were not 100 feet from the burning focus, the light of which increased and dazzled our eyes. At this moment, leaning on the forecastle bulwark, I saw below me Ned Land grappling the martingale in one hand, brandishing his terrible harpoon in the other, scarcely 20 feet from the motionless animal. Suddenly his arm straightened, and the harpoon was thrown. I heard the sonorous stroke of the weapon, which seemed to have struck a hard body. The electric light went out suddenly, and 2 enormous waterspouts broke over the bridge of the frigate, rushing like a torrent from stem to stern, overthrowing men and breaking the lashings of the spars. A fearful shock followed, and, thrown over the rail without having time to stop myself, I fell into the sea. That's the end of that chapter. Which means it's a moment's break time for me. Water. And a moment for self-promotion. So, as usual, what I always do between chapters is remind everyone that I'm a fantasy author. Fantasy and science fiction. I just haven't published any science fiction. But I'm a fantasy author. My latest book, Withered Kingdom, is a fantasy novel about an angel who has lost all of his memories and realizes that the only way to attain the type of peace that he wants is to make it to the other side of the battlefield, even if that means going against some of his own principles. It's kind of like the world of Lord of the Rings, with a magic system like Avatar: The Last Airbender and a plot like Bourne Identity. So, if that intrigues you, please check it out on Amazon. It is now available in 3 formats: ebook, softcover, and hardcover. You can search under my name, Nathan T. Orgel, or Nathan Thomas Orgel, or just under the name of the book, Withered Kingdom. It should be pretty easy to find. If you search it on Google, you'll come up with a few of my various social medias, including my Twitter, my Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, my YouTube channel, and maybe even this Twitch account. Any share you can do, any like, any follow, any subscribe, any of those buzzwords you always hear people saying on Twitch and YouTube, they are definitely hugely helpful. They help algorithms spread the word about my work, my blog, these videos, and my books to other people. And hopefully I'll be able to sell some books that way. Because I'm an introvert and not exactly a great face-to-face salesman, so I'm doing what I can on the internet to spread the word about my book, because I believe that it's interesting enough, even if I am fully aware of my faults. I feel like it is interesting enough that people will want to read it and maybe have some fraction of the kind of wonder and awe that I have experienced from various books, video games, television shows, movies that have inspired me. Things like The Legend of Zelda, Star Wars, Star Trek, a lot of the things that I mentioned in the description of the book, like Lord of the Rings and Avatar: The Last Airbender. These things are all huge inspirations to me, and my work is kind of a synthesis of everything that I've experienced, all of my favorite pieces of art, whether that's like a capital A art or a lowercase a art. I've put a lot of time and effort into my book, and through the magic of Amazon's Kindle Direct Publishing program, you can read it. All of the thoughts that I put into words over a series of years is now a tangible printed book or a file that you can download on Kindle. So if you'd like to support me, please do that. If not, you can absolutely still help me by liking and sharing and commenting, subscribing, following, tweeting, everything you can do with all of my social media presences, sharing this video. Anything you can do, that's totally free. I've just put donation pages or donation blocks into my blog. So you can go to my blog, phyronianchronicle.com. That's PHRONIANCHRONICLE.com, phyronianchronicle.com. That's the home of my blog. And in a lot of the blog posts, you can go in there and you can donate. Either a one-time donation, a monthly donation, or a yearly donation to help keep my blog running, to help keep Nate Reads the Classics running. If you had a request for a classic book that you wanted me to read, either because it's homework for you or because you've just always wanted to read it, that's something you could definitely consider doing, giving me a donation and shooting me a message on any of the social medias that I mentioned. Then I would consider reading it and maybe set aside more time for Twitch between all of the other things that I'm doing, between writing and publicizing my book and blogging, various other things. One more sip of water and then I'll continue reading. A lot of writers are asked if they like coffee or tea. I just like water. That's probably really unusual, but maybe like Brandon Sanderson, I'm just kind of a water type of person. I don't drink water with nothing but ice and a little water like Brandon does, but good filtered water. Usually just get it in jugs from the grocery store. Anyway, I'm rambling. This is chapter 7, An Unknown Species of Whale. This unexpected fall so stunned me that I have no clear recollection of my sensations at the time. I was at first drawn down to a depth of about 20 feet. I am a good swimmer, though without pretending to rival Byron or Edgar Poe, who were masters of the art, and in that plunge I did not lose my presence of mind. 2 vigorous strokes brought me to the surface of the water. My first care was to look for the frigate. Had the crew seen me disappear? Had the Abraham Lincoln veered round? Would the captain put out a boat? Might I hope to be saved? The darkness was intense. I caught a glimpse of a black mass disappearing in the east, its beacon lights dying out in the distance. It was the frigate. I was lost. "Help, help!" I shouted, swimming towards Abraham Lincoln in desperation. My clothes encumbered me. They seemed glued to my body and paralyzed my movements. I was sinking. I was suffocating. "Help!" This was my last cry. My mouth filled with water. I struggled against being drawn down the abyss. Suddenly my clothes were seized by a strong hand, and I felt myself quickly drawn up to the surface of the sea. And I heard these words pronounced in my ear. If Master would be so good as to lean on my shoulder, Master would swim with much greater ease. I seized with one hand my faithful Conseil's arm. "Is it you?" said I. "You?" "Myself," answered Conseil, "and waiting Master's orders." "That shock threw you as well as me into the sea." "No, but being in my master's service, I followed him." The worthy fellow thought that was but natural. "And the frigate?" I asked. "The frigate," replied Conseil, turning on his back. "I think that Master had better not count too much on her." "You think so?" "I say that, at the time I threw myself into the sea, I heard the men at the wheel say, 'The screw and the rudder are broken.'" "Broken?" "Yes, broken by the monster's teeth. It is the only injury the Abraham Lincoln has sustained, but it is a bad lookout for us. She no longer answers her helm." "Then we are lost." "Perhaps so," calmly answered Conseil. "However, we have still several hours before us, and one can do a good deal in some hours." Conseil's imperturbable coolness set me up again. I swam more vigorously, but cramped by my clothes, which stuck to me like a leaden weight. I felt great difficulty in bearing up. Conseil saw this. "Will Master let me make a slit?" said he, and slipping an open knife under my clothes, he ripped them up from top to bottom very rapidly. Then he cleverly slipped them off me while I swam for both of us. Then I did the same for Conseil, and we continued to swim near to each other. Nevertheless, our situation was no less terrible. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and if it had been, the frigate could not tack, being without its helm. Conseil argued on this supposition and laid his plans accordingly. This quiet boy was perfectly self-possessed. We then decided that, as our only chance of safety was being picked up by the Abraham Lincoln's boats, we ought to manage so as to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved then to husband our strength, so that both should not be exhausted at the same time, and this is how we managed. While one of us lay on our back, quite still, with arms crossed and legs stretched out, the other would swim and push the other on in front. This towing business did not last more than 10 minutes each, and relieving each other thus, we could swim on for some hours, perhaps till daybreak. Poor chance, but hope is so firmly rooted in the heart of man. Moreover, there were two of us. Indeed, I declare, though it may seem improbable, if I sought to destroy all hope, if I wished to despair, I could not. The collision of the frigate with the cetacean had occurred about 11 o'clock in the evening before. I reckoned then that we should have 8 hours to swim before sunrise, an operation quite practicable if we relieved each other. The sea, very calm, was in our favor. Sometimes I tried to pierce the intense darkness that was only dispelled by the phosphorescence caused by our movements. I watched the luminous waves that broke over my hand, whose mirror-like surface was spotted with silvery rings. One might have said that we were in a bath of quicksilver. Near 1 o'clock in the morning I was seized with dreadful fatigue. My arms stiffened under the strain of violent cramp. Conseil was obliged to keep me up, and our preservation devolved on him alone. I heard the poor boy pant. His breathing became short and hurried. I found that he could not keep up much longer. Leave me, I said to him. Leave my master? Never, replied he. I would drown first. And then the moon appeared through the fringes of a thick cloud that the wind was driving to the east. The surface of the sea glittered with its rays. This kindly light reanimated us. My heart got better again. I looked at all points of the horizon. I saw the frigate. She was 5 miles from us, and looked like a dark mass, hardly discernible, but no boats. I would have cried out, but what good would it have been at such a distance? My swollen lips could utter no sounds. Conseil could articulate some words, and I heard him repeat at intervals, "Help! Help!" Our movements were suspended for an instant. We listened. It might only be a singing in the ear, but it seemed to me as if a cry answered the cry from Conseil. "Did you hear?" I murmured. "Yes, yes." And Conseil gave one more despairing cry. This time there was no mistake. A human voice responded to ours. Was it the voice of another unfortunate creature abandoned in the middle of the ocean? Some other victim of a shock sustained by the vessel? Or rather was it a boat from the frigate that was hailing us in the darkness? Conseil made a last effort, and leaning on my shoulder, while I struck out in a desperate effort, he raised himself half out of the water, then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," murmured he. "I saw, but do not talk. Reserve all your strength." What had he seen? Then, I know not why, the thought of the monster came into my head for the first time. But that voice, the time is past for Jonahs to take refuge in whales' bellies. However, Conseil was towing me again. He raised his head sometimes, looked before us, and uttered a cry of recognition, which was responded to by a voice that came nearer and nearer. I scarcely heard it. My strength was exhausted. My fingers stiffened. My hand afforded me support no longer. My mouth, convulsively opening, filled with salt water. Cold crept over me. I raised my head for the last time, then I sank. At this moment a hard body struck me. I clung to it, then I felt that I was being drawn up, that I was brought to the surface of the water, that my chest collapsed. I fainted. It is certain that I soon came to, thanks to the vigorous rubbings that I received. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil," I murmured. "Does master call me?" asked Conseil. Just then, by the waning light of the moon, which was sinking down to the horizon, I saw a face which was not Conseil's, and which I immediately recognized. "Ned!" I cried. "The same, sir." "Who is seeking his prize," replied the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by the shock of the frigate?" "Yes, Professor, but more fortunate than you, I was able to find a footing almost directly upon a floating island." "An island? Or more correctly speaking, on our gigantic narwhal." "Explain yourself, Ned." "Only I soon found out why my harpoon had not entered its skin, and was blunted." "Why, Ned, why?" "Because, Professor, that beast is made of sheet iron." Kind of thought so. The Canadian's last words produced a sudden revolution in my brain. I wiggled myself quickly to the top of the being, or object, half out of the water, which served us for a refuge. I kicked it. It was evidently a hard, impenetrable body, and not the soft substance that forms the bodies of great marine mammalia. But this hard body might be a bony covering, like that of the antediluvian animals, and I should be free to class this monster among amphibious reptiles such as tortoises or alligators. Well, no. The blackish back that supported me was smooth, polished, without scales. The blow produced a metallic sound, and incredible though it may be, it seemed, I might say, as if it was made of riveted plates. There was no doubt about it. This monster, this natural phenomenon that had puzzled the learned world, and overthrown and misled the imagination of seamen of both hemispheres, it must be owned, was a still more astonishing phenomenon, inasmuch as it was simply human construction. We had no time to lose, however. We were lying on the back of a sort of submarine boat, which appeared, as far as I could judge, like a huge fish of steel. Ned Land's mind was made up on this point. Conseil and I could only agree with them. Just then a bubbling began at the back of this strange thing, which was evidently propelled by a screw, and it began to move. We had only just time to seize hold of the upper part, which rose about 7 feet out of the water, and happily its speed was not great. "As long as it sails horizontally," muttered Ned Land. I do not mind, but if it takes a fancy to dive, I would not give 2 straws for my life. The Canadian might have said still less. It became necessary to communicate with the beings, wherever they were, shut up inside the machine. I searched all over the outside of the aperture, a panel or a manhole to use a technical expression, but the lines of the iron rivets, solidly driven into the joints of the iron plates, were clear and uniform. Besides, the moon disappeared then and left us in total darkness. At last this long night passed. My indistinct remembrance prevents my describing all the impressions it made. I can only recall one circumstance. During some lulls in the wind and sea, I fancied I heard several times vague sounds, a sort of fugitive harmony, produced by words of command. What was, then, the mystery of this submarine craft, of which the whole world vainly sought an explanation? What kind of beings existed on the strange boat? What mechanical agent caused its prodigious speed? Daybreak appeared. The morning mists surrounded us, but they soon cleared off. I was about to examine the hull, which formed a deck on a kind of horizontal platform, but I felt it gradually sinking. "Oh, confound it!" cried Ned Land, kicking the resounding plate. "Open, you inhospitable rascals!" Happily the sinking movement ceased. Suddenly a noise, like ironworks violently pushed aside, came from the interior of the boat. One iron plate was moved. A man appeared, uttered an odd cry, and disappeared immediately. Some moments after, 8 strong men with masked faces appeared noiselessly and drew us down into the formidable machine. That's the end of that chapter, chapter 7. So that was interesting. This is a much more entertaining book than I thought. I mean, of course, books had to be entertaining. Back in the day, people weren't reading them for, something to be bored by. It was their primary form of entertainment. There wasn't TV. I don't even know if there was radio yet. I'm not really up on the history of when radio started, but if this is the late 1800s, I imagine some of the technology was kind of available. This isn't super long before the Titanic was built. If the Titanic was built in 1912 or 1914, something like that. We are talking about iron and steel vessels and not just wood. Just because the year starts with 18 doesn't mean it's ancient technology. So, yeah. Let me take a moment to adjust my seating here, so I can more comfortably proceed with the next chapter. Crack my neck a little bit. So just my thoughts reading through this so far. This is a much more engaging book than I expected it to be. I kind of thought it was going to be boring. I realized as I was reading that chapter before the chapter I just read, I realized that part of the reason I feel drawn to it is it's very familiar to me. Not that I've read a lot of sailing books, and I haven't even really been sailing, but I have seen a couple of movies that are about sailing and about this kind of time period and the Napoleonic Wars and stuff like that, but it's really like Star Trek. Star Trek mimics this type of storytelling with, a ship and different decks and different crew members with different abilities and things like that. There might not be aliens, but kind of the way it's set up. It's just Star Trek is just kind of like this naval adventure, but in space. I know it was originally described as a wagon train to the stars, but I think it makes a little more sense because of the military aspects in Star Trek to relate it to the Napoleonic Wars, but in space. So there's probably a billion people on the internet that have already brought that kind of idea up, but that's the first time it occurred to me. But yeah, I was thinking this was going to be a difficult book to read through because it's kind of it's not as short as The Time Machine. When I read The Time Machine, I was able to get through that in, I believe, 2 sittings. Well, two streams. I definitely got up and moved around a little bit during them, but this is just looking at the progress bar, not the progress bar, the scroll bar. Unless that thing gets longer as I scroll down, I'm at least an eighth of the way through the book already. It might not be that long of a book. That or reading out loud and being dedicated to doing a longer Twitch stream is just proving that I can read rather fast. I never feel like I read fast. I always feel like I read really slowly. Anyway, writing is definitely slower than reading, so that's just been my own experience. Just reading through just for making some, late game spelling corrections and capitalization and punctuation corrections to my own book, as I have just typeset the hardcover version. I just read through it again, which makes it like the 5 millionth time I've read through my own book. That book isn't very long, but it still felt like it took forever to write. It is over 50,000 words. It's not quite as long as any one of the Lord of the Rings books, but I believe it is longer than The Hobbit. I might be wrong on that. I know I've compared them before, and I know, well, it's for sure longer than the first Chronicles of Narnia book, The Magician's Nephew, because that one's like really short. But yeah, my novel, Withered Kingdom, is available now on Amazon in all 3 Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing formats. Those 3 formats being the Kindle ebook, the regular paperback, which I do actually have to show. I do not have the hardcover yet because the printing has not, the original printing has not yet arrived. Yeah, this is Withered Kingdom. It's going to be mirrored. It looks like this is the paperback book. See, it's not super thick, but I actually do like the quality of how the Kindle Direct paperbacks come out. It's just regular perfect binding, glued, soft cover book, but the cover itself is nicely textured, I think. The pages are pretty thick and feel like they have a good weight to them. This would definitely be thinner if I had typeset it to have all the lines closer together, but just for legibility's sake and for making it look a little more formidable, or a little more average, I suppose, I beefed up the typesetting a little bit, make it look a little more interesting. Just noticed there's a whole bunch of people showing up on my chat here. Hello. I do not have a sword, but anyway, as I was saying, this is my book. I wrote this book. I did not write 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. That's Jules Verne. That's classic literature. But this book, Withered Kingdom, you can buy now on Amazon through the Kindle, or you can buy the Kindle version on the Kindle app or on Amazon itself. You can buy the paperback, and you can now buy the hardback, which I just published. The story of Withered Kingdom is an angel who has lost his memories, goes on an adventure and ends up getting wrapped up in a magical war. And as he's trying to regain his lost memories, he realizes that the only way he's going to find peace is on the other side of the battlefield. If you're going to buy that book right now, that would be awesome. I would really appreciate that. Yeah, you can just search Withered Kingdom on Amazon, or you can search my name, Nathan Thomas Orgill. Orgill being spelled Orgill. So you'll probably have better luck Just Searching Withered Kingdom. It's a rather short fantasy book, but there are sequels coming out. I have almost finished producing the second one, and I have a third and fourth drafted, and I am working on the fifth. The fifth book is going to be enormous compared to this. Like, it'll be at least 4 times as thick as that. This is the most viewers I've ever had on my stream at one time. Thanks, guys. $10 and I'll leave you a positive review. Well, I'm not really in the habit of paying people to review my work, but you know, I don't know. I might be violating some terms of service with Amazon if I did pay for reviews anyway. So, yeah, I mean, leave whatever review feels natural for you. Anything that's fair and reasonable. It is definitely self-published. I am primarily my own editor and my own proofreader and my own basically everything. I did it all on my own, except for reading it to my wife and sending it to some family members to have them review it. That's what I have resource-wise, is basically myself and a couple people I know. So if you did buy it, if anyone out there is listening does buy it, you would be supporting an independent author and helping someone make their dream come true as an author. You'd be supporting my blog. You'd be supporting Nate Reads the Classics, where I do more of this exact same kind of reading. There is a layer of hair on your shirt. Yes, if you watched earlier part of this stream, my cat was resting on my shoulder, and he sheds a lot, and my shirt is black, and it just absorbs it. I'm not gonna make any stances that could be controversial in any kind of way here on Twitch. So, I appreciate the interest. I appreciate the chats, but that's not something I feel qualified to get into. I'm mostly here right now to sell my own book and to read for other people's pleasure, but like I said, I'm not gonna go into that. I don't really even feel qualified to have an opinion, honestly. I'm a man, so that's where I'm going to leave that topic. Have you Netflix up to the book? That's a lot of questions. I'm not really sure how to answer that. There's the book is mostly action, is what I'll say. It is a lot of self-discovery, and it is a lot of one character trying to make sense of a world that is completely foreign. He's from a completely different world, and so this world that he finds himself in is one where he's learning everything from the ground up. It's a fish out of water story, and it's an adventure. It's a journey, mostly in one uniform direction for this book, and then after this book it spreads out into other directions, creating a much more world-building centric type of fantasy. Like I mentioned Brandon Sanderson before, I model my work a lot after his. I have cats and I've never had hair on me like that. Well, you probably haven't had my cat. He produces a lot more hair than any other cat I've ever met. You're not buying the book. You're not buying the book if there's gay sex. Well, there's not sex of any kind in the book anyway, so. Is the kingdom all white? Definitely not. Definitely not. The first character that's actually described, I later describe as as being black, and there's definitely a lot of other characters of non-white complexion. Let's see here. Do you have any other merch? No, not yet. I would love to produce more merch, some shirts, stickers. Basically, all I have is my own business cards and a couple of the copies of the book. Um, I'm working from basically a no budget, whatever I have left over besides trying to survive. Well, it's not medieval times on Earth, so if you're wondering why it's not medieval times on Earth, it's a completely different world. So, anyway, my primary purpose here is reading out of this book, not my book that I've been talking about, but 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So I'm going to get back to that after another drink. And I can talk more after this chapter. This is chapter, it's all in Roman numerals, 8. Mobilis immobili. This forcible abduction, so roughly carried out, was accomplished with the rapidity of lightning. I shivered all over. Whom had we to deal with? No doubt some new sort of pirates, who explored the sea in their own way. Hardly had the narrow panel crossed upon me, when I was enveloped in darkness. My eyes, dazzled with the outer light, could distinguish nothing. I felt my naked feet cling to the rungs of an iron ladder. Ned Land and Conseil, firmly seized, followed me. At the bottom of the ladder, a door opened and shut after us immediately with a bang. We were alone, where I could not say, hardly imagine. All was black, and such a dense black that after some minutes my eyes had not been able to discern even the faintest glimmer. Meanwhile, Ned Land, furious at these proceedings, gave free vent to his indignation. "Confound it," cried he, "here are people who come up to the Scotch for hospitality. They only just miss being cannibals. I should not be surprised at it, but I declare that they shall not eat me without my protesting." "Calm yourself, friend Ned, calm yourself," replied Conseil quietly. "Do not cry out before you are hurt. We are not quite done for yet." "Not quite," sharply replied the Canadian, "but pretty near. At all events, things look black. Hopefully my bowie knife I have still, and I can always see well enough to use it. The first of these pirates who lays hand on me—" "Do not excite yourself, Ned," I said to the harpooner, "and do not compromise us by useless violence." Compromise us by useless violence. Who knows that they will not listen to us? Let us rather try to find out where we are. I groped about. In 5 steps I came to an iron wall made of plates bolted together. Then, turning back, I struck against a wooden table, near which were ranged several stools. The boards of this prison were concealed under a thick mat, which deadened the noise of the feet. The bare walls revealed no trace of window or door. Conseil, going round the reverse way, met me, and we went back to the middle of the cabin, which measured about 20 feet by 10. As to its height, Ned Land, in spite of his own great height, could not measure it. Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted, that is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter, so strong that I could not bear it at first. With its whiteness and intensity, I recognized that electric light which played round the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomenon of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them. My cat's going nuts behind me. It is almost 4 o'clock, and cats do often do that. What are you doing, cat? Where was I? Half an hour had already passed without our situation being bettered, when the dense darkness suddenly gave way to extreme light. Our prison was suddenly lighted, that is to say, it became filled with a luminous matter, so strong that I could not bear it at first. In its whiteness and intensity, I recognized that electric light which played round the submarine boat like a magnificent phenomenon of phosphorescence. After shutting my eyes involuntarily, I opened them, and saw that this luminous agent came from a half-globe, unpolished, placed in the roof of the cabin. At last one can see, cried Ned Land, who, knife in hand, stood on the defensive. Yes, said I, but we are still in the dark about ourselves. Let master have patience, said the imperturbable Conseil. The sudden lighting of the cabin enabled me to examine it minutely. It only contained a table of 5 stools. The invisible door might be hermetically sealed. No noise was heard. All seemed dead in the interior of this boat. Did it move? Did it float on the surface of the ocean, or did it dive into its depths? I could not guess. A noise of bolts was now heard. The door opened, and 2 men appeared. One was short, very muscular, broad-shouldered, with robust limbs, strong head, an abundance of black hair, thick mustache, a quick penetrating look, and the vivacity which characterizes the population of southern France. The second stranger merits a more detailed description. I made out his prevailing qualities directly. Self-confidence, because his head was well set on his shoulders, and his black eyes looked around with cold assurance. Calmness, for his skin, rather pale, showed his coolness of blood. Energy, evinced by the rapid contraction of his lofty brows, and courage, because his deep breathing denoted great power of lungs. Whether this person was 35 or 50 years of age, I could not say. He was tall, had a large forehead, straight nose, a clearly cut mouth, beautiful teeth, with fine taper hands, indicative of a highly nervous temperament. This man was certainly the most admirable specimen I had ever met. One particular feature was his eyes, rather far from each other, and which could take in nearly a quarter of the horizon at once. This faculty, I verified it later, gave him a range of vision far superior to Ned Land's. When the stranger fixed upon an object, his eyebrows met, his large eyelids closed around, so as to contract the range of his vision. Hi, what are you doing? Can you stop? Fixed upon his object, his eyebrows met, large eyelids closed so as to contract the range of his vision. Looked as if he magnified the object's lesson by distance, as if he pierced those sheets of water so opaque to our eyes, as if he read the very depths of the seas. The 2 strangers, with caps made from the fur of the sea otter, and shod with sea boots of seal's skin, were dressed in clothes of a particular texture, which allowed free movement of the limbs. The taller of the 2, evidently the chief on board, examined us with great attention, without saying a word, then turning to his companion, talked with him in an unknown tongue. It was a sonorous, harmonious, and flexible dialect. The vowels seeming to admit of very varied accentuation. The other replied by a shake of the head, and added 2 or 3 perfectly incomprehensible words. Then he seemed to question me by a look. I replied in good French that I did not know his language, but he seemed not to understand me, and my situation became more embarrassing. If master were to tell our story, said Conseil, perhaps these gentlemen may understand some words. I began to tell our adventures, articulating each syllable clearly, and without omitting one single detail, I announced our names and rank, introducing in person Professor Aronnax, his servant Conseil, and Master Ned Land, the harpooner. The man with the soft, calm eyes listened to me quietly, even politely, and with extreme attention, but nothing in his countenance indicated that he had understood my story. When I finished, he said not a word. There remained one resource, to speak English. Perhaps they would know this almost universal language. I knew it, as well as the German language, well enough to read it fluently, but not to speak it correctly. But anyhow, we must make ourselves understood. Go on in your turn, I said to the harpooner. Speak your best Anglo-Saxon and try to do better than I did. Ned did not beg off, and recommenced our story. To his great disgust, the harpooner did not seem to have made himself more intelligible than I had. Our visitors did not stir. They evidently understood neither the language of England nor of France. Very much embarrassed, after having vainly exhausted our speaking resources, I knew not what part to take when Conseil said, If master will permit me, I will relate it in German. But in spite of the elegant terms and good accent of the narrator, the German language had no success. At last, nonplussed, I tried to remember my first lessons, and to narrate our adventures in Latin, but with no better success. This last attempt being of no avail, the two strangers exchanged some words in their unknown language and retired. The door shut. "It is an infamous shame," cried Ned Land, who broke out for the 20th time. "We speak to those rogues in French, English, German, and Latin, and not one of them has the politeness to answer." "Calm yourself," I said to the impetuous Ned. "Anger will do no good." "But do you see, Professor," replied our irascible companion, "that we shall absolutely die of hunger in this iron cage?" "Bah," said Conseil philosophically. "We can hold out some time yet." "My friends," said I, "we must not despair. We have been worse off than this. Do me the favor to wait a little before forming an opinion upon my commander and crew of this boat." "My opinion is formed," replied Ned Land sharply. "They are rascals." "Good, and from what country?" "From the land of rogues." "My brave Ned, that country is not clearly indicated on the map of the world, but I admit that the nationality of the two strangers is hard to determine. Neither English, French, nor German, and that is quite certain. However, I am inclined to think that the commander and his companion were born in low latitudes. There is southern blood in them, but I cannot decide by their appearance whether they are Spaniards, Turks, Arabians, or Indians. As to their language, it is quite incomprehensible." "There is the disadvantage of not knowing all languages," said Conseil, "or the disadvantage of not having one universal language." As he said these words, the door opened. A steward entered. He brought us clothes, coats, trousers, made of a stuff I did not know. I hastened to dress myself, and my companions followed my example. During that time, the steward, dumb, perhaps deaf, had arranged the table and laid 3 plates. "This is something like," said Conseil. "Bah," said the angry harpooner. "What do you suppose they eat here? Tortoise liver, filleted shark, and beefsteaks from sea dogs?" "We shall see," said Conseil. The dishes of bell metal were placed on the table, and we took our places. Undoubtedly, we had to do with civilized people, and, had it not been for the electric light which flooded us, I could have fancied I was in the dining room of the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool, or at the Grand Hotel in Paris. I must say, however, that there was neither bread nor wine. The water was fresh and clear, but it was water and did not suit Ned Land's taste. Amongst the dishes which were brought to us, I recognized several fish, delicately dressed, but of some, although excellent, I could give no opinion. Neither could I tell what kingdom they belonged, whether animal or vegetable. As to the dinner service, it was elegant, and in perfect taste. Each utensil, spoon, fork, knife, plate, had a letter engraved on it with a motto above it, of which this is an exact facsimile: Mobilis and Mobili, N. The letter N was no doubt the initial of the name of the enigmatical person who commanded at the bottom of the seas. Ned and Conseil did not reflect much. They devoured the food, and I did likewise. I was besides reassured as to our fate, and it seemed evident that our hosts would not let us die of want. However, everything has an end, everything passes away, even the hunger of people who have not eaten for 15 hours. Our appetites satisfied, we felt overcome with sleep. "Faith, I shall sleep well," said Conseil. "So shall I," replied Ned Land. My 2 companions stretched themselves on the cabin carpet, and were soon sound asleep. For my own part, too many thoughts crowded my brain. Too many insoluble questions pressed upon me. Too many fancies kept my eyes half open. Where were we? What strange power carried us on? I felt, or rather fancied I felt, the machine sinking down to the lowest beds of the sea. Dreadful nightmares beset me. I saw in these mysterious asylums a world of unknown animals, amongst which the submarine boat seemed to be of the same kind, living, moving, and formidable as they. Then my brain grew calmer, my imagination wandered into vague unconsciousness, and I soon fell into a deep sleep. And that is the end of that chapter. I see that there has been a whole lot of chat that I have missed, and I'm not about to scroll through it all. Just because my voice is already getting weak. It is late at night, and I think I'm out of water. Again, for anyone who might still be here, my name is Nathan. I am a fantasy writer. I wrote a book called Withered Kingdom, and it's a fantasy novel about an angel who has forgotten his past. He has no memories of his past life, and he is trying to uncover the secrets of his past in a world torn apart by a magical war. The only way he's going to find peace in this world is to make it to the other side of the battlefield. It's kind of like the world of Lord of the Rings with a magic system, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and a plot like Born Identity. If that's any indication, you can find it on Amazon.com, either as a hardcover, paperback, or on the Kindle app as a Kindle ebook. I think my cat might try to jump on me again. Hi. I'm going to go ahead to chapter 9, and then I will call it for the evening for myself. Chapter 9, Ned Land's Tempers. How long we slept I do not know, but our sleep must have lasted long, for it rested us completely from our fatigues. I woke first. My companions had not moved, and were still stretched in their corner. Hardly roused from my somewhat hard couch, I felt my brain my mind clear. I then began an attentive examination of our cell. Nothing was changed inside. The prison was still a prison, the prisoners prisoners. However, the steward, during our sleep, had cleared the table. I breathed with difficulty. The heavy air seemed to oppress my lungs. Although the cell was large, we had evidently consumed a great part of the oxygen that it contained. Indeed, each man consumes, in 1 hour, the oxygen contained in more than 176 pints of air, and this air, charged, as then, with a nearly equal quantity of carbonic acid, becomes unbreathable. It became necessary to renew the atmosphere of our prison, and no doubt the hole in the submarine boat. That gave rise to a question in my mind. How would the commander of this floating dwelling place proceed? Would he obtain air by chemical means, and getting by heat the oxygen contained in chlorate of potash, and in absorbing carbonic acid by caustic potash? Or a more convenient, economical, and consequently more probable alternative? Would he be satisfied to rise and take breath at the surface of the water, like a whale, and so renew for 24 hours the atmospheric provision? In fact, I was already obliged to increase my respirations, to eke out of this cell the little oxygen it contained, when suddenly I was refreshed by a current of pure air, and perfumed with saline emanations. It was an invigorating sea breeze, charged with iodine. I opened my mouth wide, and my lungs saturated themselves with fresh particles. At the same time I felt the boat rolling. The iron-plated monster had evidently just risen to the surface of the ocean to breathe. After the fashion of whales, I found out from that the mode of ventilating the boat. When I had inhaled this air freely, I sought the conduit pipe which conveyed to us the beneficial whiff, and I was not long in finding it. Above the door was a ventilator, through which volumes of fresh air renewed the impoverished atmosphere of the cell. I was making my observations when Ned and Conseil awoke almost at the same time, under the influence of this reviving air. They rubbed their eyes, stretched themselves, and were on their feet in an instant. "Did master sleep well?" asked Conseil, with his usual politeness. Very well, brave boy. And you, Mr. Land? Soundly, Professor, but I don't know if I am right or not. There seems to be a sea breeze. A seaman could not be mistaken, and I told the Canadian all that had passed during his sleep. Good, said he. That accounts for those roarings we heard when the supposed narwhal sighted the Abraham Lincoln. Quite so, Master Land, it was taking breath. Only, Mr. Aronnax, I have no idea what o'clock it is, unless it is dinner time. Dinner time? My good fellow. Say rather breakfast time, for we certainly have begun another day. So, said Conseil, we have slept 24 hours? That is my opinion. I will not contradict you, replied Ned Land, but dinner or breakfast the steward will be welcome, whichever he brings. Master Land, we must conform to the rules on board. I suppose our appetites are in advance of the dinner hour. That is just like you, friend Conseil, said Ned impatiently. You are never out of temper, always calm. You would return thanks before grace and die of hunger rather than complain. Time was getting on, and we were fearfully hungry, and this time the steward did not appear. It was rather too long to leave us, if they really had good intentions toward us. Ned Land, tormented by the cravings of hunger, got still more angry, and notwithstanding his promise, I dreaded an explosion when he found himself with one of the crew. For 2 hours more, Ned Land's temper increased. He cried, he shouted, but in vain. The walls were deaf. There was no sound to be heard in the boat, but was still as death. It did not move, for I should have felt the trembling motion of the hull under the influence of the screw. Plunged in the depths of the waters, it belonged no longer to earth. This silence was dreadful. I was terrified. Conseil was calm. Ned Land roared. Just then a noise was heard outside. Steps sounded on the metal flags. The locks were turned, the door opened, and the steward appeared. Before I could rush forward to stop him, the Canadian had thrown him down and held him by the throat. The steward was choking under the grip of his powerful hand. Conseil was already trying to unclasp the harpooner's hand from his half-suffocated victim, and I was going to fly to the rescue, when suddenly I was nailed to the spot by hearing these words in French. Be quiet, Master Land, and you, Professor, will you be so good as to listen to me? That's a bit of a twist. That is the end of chapter 9, and that is where I'm going to stop for the evening. I'm out of water. My throat is very dry, and I'm tired. Thanks for everyone who joined. If you would like to support Nate Reads the Classics, please buy my book, Withered Kingdom, which you can find on Amazon.com. It is available as a Kindle ebook, as a paperback book, like this, and a hardcover version, which looks a little different from this, but it's similar enough. The hardcover was just published, or just approved by Amazon, so you can buy it now. I am probably going to continue this some other time. I don't quite know when yet. I don't really have a schedule to go by, but I am interested a lot in continuing 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. So thanks everyone who joined in. See you some other time.